Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Thursday, March 26, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. In Riverside, you can expect a warm one today with a high of 88 degrees and a low of 59.6 degrees. Make sure to dress appropriately if you are heading out. On today's program, we are looking at the crucial factors to watch as the deadline regarding the conflict with Iran nears. We are also examining the innovative strategies California is implementing to stop homelessness before it even begins. Beyond these major headlines, we will have a variety of other important stories to keep you informed about what is happening in the world around us. We have a lot of ground to cover this morning, so stick with us for the full episode of Alex's News. We start this morning with the war between the United States, Israel, and Iran, now in its 26th day. The diplomatic window is shrinking fast, with a major deadline just 2 days away. Ethan covers national security for us and has been tracking every twist. Ethan, where do things stand right now?
Grace, we're at what most analysts are calling a moment of pure brinkmanship. Iran formally rejected a 15-point American peace proposal 2 days ago and fired back with its own 5-point counteroffer. President Trump's ultimatum expires on March 28th. So we're looking at less than 48 hours before the U.S. could launch a massive escalation against Iran's energy infrastructure. CNN and Fox News both report the White House considers this deadline firm, though we've already seen one extension.
Let's back up for listeners just catching up. How did this war begin?
It started on February 28th, just under a month ago, with what the Pentagon calls Operation Epic Fury. Israel's using a separate name, Operation Roaring Lion. According to ABC News and Al Jazeera, the opening hours were staggering, nearly 900 strikes in just 12 hours, targeting air defenses, missile sites, and leadership compounds across Iran. The most consequential strike killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei at a security compound in Tehran. His son, Mojtaba Khamenei, has since taken over, and that transition has shaped everything about how Iran has responded.
And the legal justification for all of this? That's been controversial from day one.
It really has. The Trump administration said Iran posed an imminent threat because it was restarting a nuclear weapons program. They cited intelligence about highly enriched uranium being moved to underground facilities. But the New York Times and The Guardian have both drawn direct parallels to the 2003 Iraq War. The International Atomic Energy Agency said as recently as late March that there's, quote, no evidence of a structured nuclear weapons program, end quote. Investigative reporting also suggests the military planning for Epic Fury was finalized as early as late 2025, well before the stated trigger.
So what exactly was in this 15-point peace plan the U.S. put forward?
It arrived 2 days ago, on March 24th, delivered through Pakistani mediators. CNBC and the Wall Street Journal report the demands are sweeping. Washington wants total nuclear disarmament, including shutting down the Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordow facilities. It demands a permanent halt to all uranium enrichment and the dismantling of Iran's proxy networks, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. It also requires Iran to guarantee the Strait of Hormuz stays open. In return, the U.S. offered to lift nuclear-related sanctions and help Iran develop a civilian-only nuclear program at the Bushehr plant.
Tehran clearly wasn't interested. What did they say?
Not interested is an understatement. Al Jazeera and BBC News report that Iranian officials called the proposal maximalist, unreasonable, and essentially a demand for unconditional surrender. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi came back with a 5-point counteroffer that reads like a mirror image of American demands. Iran wants all airstrikes and what it calls assassinations to stop immediately. It wants concrete guarantees that war won't be reimposed once a deal is struck. It's demanding reparations for the damage to Iranian infrastructure. It insists any ceasefire must cover all resistance groups, including Hezbollah. And perhaps most provocatively, it wants international recognition of Iran's sovereign right to control and police the Strait of Hormuz.
That last point alone seems like a deal breaker for Washington.
Absolutely. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most critical energy choke points on the planet. Roughly a fifth of the world's oil passes through it. Iran claiming exclusive control would give Tehran leverage over the global economy for decades. There's virtually no scenario where the U.S. or its Gulf allies accept that. So right now, you've got two sides with proposals that don't overlap on any meaningful point, and the clock is ticking.
Speaking of that clock, tell us about the ultimatum and why Karg Island keeps coming up.
Karg Island is the linchpin. It handles about 90% of Iran's oil exports, so it's the economic heart of the country. The U.S. actually hit military assets on Karg Island back on March 13th, but it deliberately spared the oil terminals. That restraint was a signal: cooperate, and your economy survives. According to BBC News, the 82nd Airborne Division and the Tripoli Amphibious Ready Group are now positioned for a potential ground assault to seize the island if the deadline passes without a deal. President Trump first issued a 48-hour ultimatum on March 21st, then extended it 5 days on March 23rd, citing what he called productive conversations through intermediaries. That extension runs out the day after tomorrow.
What's happening on the ground militarily right now?
The buildup is enormous. Al Jazeera reports more than 50,000 U.S. troops are now deployed across the Middle East. And just today, a joint U.S.-Israeli intelligence operation killed Ali Reza Tangsiri, the commander of the IRGC Navy. He was the man Washington blamed for orchestrating the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Taking him out sends a very clear message about American reach, but it also risks hardening Iran's resolve at exactly the moment diplomats are trying to find an opening.
And Israel has opened its own front in Lebanon?
It has. Israel announced the creation of a 30-kilometer security zone inside Lebanese territory aimed at Hezbollah. The Times of Israel reports the offensive has already killed 1,072 people and wounded nearly 3,000. This is a significant ground operation happening alongside the air campaign against Iran, and it stretches the conflict well beyond a single front. Meanwhile, Iran hasn't been sitting idle. It's launched what's being described as its 81st wave of missile and drone strikes, hitting targets as far away as Tel Aviv and Abu Dhabi. One strike hit a fuel depot at Kuwait International Airport, which dragged yet another country into this crisis.
81 waves. That's a staggering pace of retaliation.
It is, and it underscores something important. Despite the massive damage the U.S. and Israel have inflicted, Iran still has the capacity to project force across the region. These aren't just symbolic launches. They're hitting meaningful targets in multiple countries, which complicates the narrative that this war is nearly over.
What's all of this doing to the global economy? We've been hearing about oil prices for weeks now.
The ripple effects are severe. NPR and Argus Media report Brent crude is surging toward $100 a barrel. About 2,000 vessels are stranded in or near the Strait of Hormuz because of the blockade and the fighting. The energy shortage is hitting developing nations hardest. Sri Lanka has started switching off streetlights to conserve power. The Philippines has declared a national energy emergency. These are countries thousands of miles from the fighting, but their economies depend on oil flowing freely through that strait. When it doesn't, everything from electricity to food prices spirals.
And back home, how is Congress responding?
It's fractured. House Speaker Mike Johnson said just yesterday that the war is, quote, wrapping up, end quote. But not everyone in his own party agrees. BBC News reports that Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace has publicly criticized the administration for a lack of transparency about ground troop deployments. She wants answers about what's being planned for Karg Island specifically. The Washington Post highlights that the White House is also feeling pressure from voters who are watching interest rates and fuel prices climb. President Trump has called the operation a, quote, great military achievement, end quote, but that framing gets harder to maintain when people are paying more at the pump every single week.
Is there any international pressure that might actually move the needle before March 28th?
China and France are both urging what they call good faith negotiations, but neither has offered a concrete alternative framework. The real question is whether Pakistan, which has been serving as the go-between, can find any overlap between those two proposals. Right now, the official word from Tehran remains one of resistance. and the official word from Washington, is that all options are on the table. So we're staring at a 48-hour window that could either produce a breakthrough or trigger an assault on the most important piece of economic real estate Iran controls.
Lot riding on the next 2 days. Ethan, thank you for walking us through all of that.
Of course, Grace.
We're going to stay in California for our second story this morning. The state's taking a dramatically different approach to its homelessness crisis, and Chloe's been digging into the details. Chloe, what's changing here?
California's essentially flipping its entire playbook on homelessness. For years, the strategy was reactive: build shelters, sweep encampments, try to house people after they'd already hit the streets. Now the state's embracing what experts call a prevention-first strategy. According to Cal Matters, the idea is to identify families on the brink of losing their housing and intervene before they ever become homeless. It treats housing instability as a solvable financial emergency rather than some kind of chronic social failure.
So what does that intervention actually look like in practice?
It's surprisingly modest, honestly. We're talking about one-time payments averaging around $6,500 per household. These are sometimes called shallow subsidies, and they cover things like back rent, security deposits, emergency car repairs so someone can keep getting to work, or unexpected medical bills. The New York Times has noted that many people fall into homelessness over shockingly small amounts, sometimes just $1,000 to $2,000. So a relatively small payment at the right moment can keep a family in their home.
That's a fraction of what it costs to build a single supportive housing unit, isn't it?
It really is. LAist reports that permanent supportive housing units in California can run upwards of $600,000 to $1 million each. That's the old downstream approach. You wait until someone's homeless, then spend enormous sums trying to get them housed again. The prevention model, which was popularized by a Santa Clara County nonprofit called Destination Home, works upstream instead. You spend a little now to avoid spending a fortune later.
And is there hard evidence this approach is actually working?
There is, and the numbers are pretty striking. A study out of the University of Notre Dame's Wilson Sheehan Lab for Economic Opportunities found that in Santa Clara County, people who received this aid were 78 to 90% less likely to become homeless than those who didn't. In San Francisco, participants were 40% less likely to lose their housing compared to a control group. And in Los Angeles County, the prevention unit there saw participants become 71% less likely to enter a shelter or use street services.
Los Angeles has apparently gotten pretty sophisticated with this. What are they doing differently?
LA's taken this to a whole other level with artificial intelligence. The UCLA Newsroom and Cal Matters report that LA County's Homelessness Prevention Unit was developed with the California Policy Lab at UCLA. It uses what they call a proactive push model. An AI system analyzes 580 variables pulled from 8 different county agencies, including health records, social services data, and criminal justice records. It identifies individuals in the top 1% of risk, people likely to become homeless within 18 months.
And then what happens once the system flags someone?
County staff actually cold call these individuals and offer them flexible financial aid before an eviction ever takes place. They're reaching out to people who might not even realize how close they are to losing their housing. It's a fundamentally different posture for government, going to people proactively instead of waiting for them to show up in crisis at a shelter door. Cal Matters describes it as one of the most data-driven homelessness efforts anywhere in the country.
It sounds almost too good to be true. Are researchers flagging any concerns?
They are, and it's an important nuance. Researchers from both UCLA and Notre Dame have pointed out something called the rare event problem. Homelessness, statistically speaking, is a rare outcome even among very poor populations. In the Santa Clara study, 95.9% of the control group, the people who got no help at all, managed to stay housed on their own through personal resilience or informal support networks. Among those who received aid, that number was 99.1%. So the program clearly works, but a significant share of public funds goes to households that might have been fine anyway.
That seems like it could be a tough sell for taxpayers. How do advocates respond to that?
They lean heavily on what they call the math of prevention. The argument goes like this. If you provide $5,000 to 25 households, and that prevents just one person from entering the shelter system, your effective cost is about $125,000. That sounds like a lot until you compare it to the long-term cost of chronic homelessness, which includes emergency room visits, jail stays, and lost economic productivity. Those costs can run far higher than $125,000 per person over time. So advocates say prevention is still the better investment, even with the targeting imperfections.
Is this prevention first philosophy getting locked into state law at all?
It's heading that direction. Assembly Bill 1924, introduced by Assemblymember Jesse Gabriel, would require California to establish a formal statewide homelessness prevention strategy by July of next year. CalMatters reports the bill doesn't include specific funding yet, partly because the state's looking at a projected budget deficit for the 2026 to 2027 fiscal year. But it does create a framework, and supporters see it as the foundation they can build funding on later.
So this is happening alongside the encampment sweeps and stricter enforcement we've been hearing about?
Exactly, and that's a key piece of the bigger picture. Prevention is the carrot, but there's definitely a stick too. After the Supreme Court's 2024 ruling in Grants Pass v. Johnson, Governor Newsom issued a model ordinance last year making it easier for cities to ban encampments. On top of that, billions from Proposition 1, the $6.4 billion bond voters approved in 2024, are funding a program called Home Key Plus that builds housing specifically for people with severe mental health and substance use disorders. The states even started clawing back funds from cities that fail to meet housing goals or clear encampments effectively.
It sounds like California is trying to tackle this from every angle. Is the prevention model spreading beyond the state?
It is, and pretty quickly. Back in February, Destination Home announced an $80 million national expansion called the Right at Home Initiative. It's funded by private donors, including Cisco, Sobrato Philanthropies, and TED's Audacious Project. The goal is to export the Santa Clara model to 10 locations across the country. As of now, 8 partners have been identified, including Miami-Dade County, Atlanta, Austin-Travis County, and tribal communities in Minnesota.
What kind of support are those communities getting to stand up their own programs?
Each community is receiving planning grants and at least $5 million to run 3-year prevention programs. The overall goal is to serve 10,000 families over the next 5 years. It's a significant investment, and it'll be the first real test of whether the California model translates to places with very different housing markets and social safety nets. A tribal community in Minnesota faces completely different challenges than Miami-Dade County, so researchers will be watching closely.
Can you put a human face on this for our listeners? What does prevention look like for an actual family?
LAist featured a woman named Desiree Campusano, a teacher and foster parent living in Milpitas. She hit a rough patch during COVID-19, dealing with rent gaps and family emergencies at the same time. The prevention program covered those costs with a one-time payment, and it kept her from spiraling into the shelter system. She eventually secured a stable apartment and went on to pursue a career teaching sociology. Without that intervention, she could have become another statistic. Instead, she's back on her feet and contributing to her community.
Are there any practical hurdles to reaching people like her before it's too late?
One of the more surprising challenges is what researchers call the scam hurdle. When county staff cold call someone and say they've been identified as at risk and the government wants to give them money, a lot of people assume it's a scam. They hang up. It's a trust problem, especially in communities that have had difficult relationships with government agencies. Outreach workers have had to get creative about building credibility quickly, but it remains a real barrier to reaching the most vulnerable people the system's designed to help.
So where does this all stand as of today? Is California confident this strategy can meaningfully change the trajectory?
The state's essentially making a bet. The theory is that if you can stabilize the inflow of newly homeless individuals through data-driven prevention, you free up resources to manage the population already living on the streets. It's a fundamental shift in philosophy. Challenges remain. from budget deficits to targeting imperfections to simple trust issues. But the early data is genuinely encouraging, and the national expansion suggests other communities see promise in this model too. California is trying to prove that you can treat homelessness the way you treat a disease, by focusing on prevention rather than just treating symptoms.
Really fascinating reporting, Chloe. Thanks for breaking all of that down for us.
Thanks, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. Silicon Valley is having a midlife crisis after a Los Angeles jury decided that scrolling shouldn't be a bottomless pit. On March 25, 2026, Meta and Google were found liable for designing social media platforms intentionally addictive to minors. Plaintiff KGM, age 20, was awarded $6 million, including $3 million in punitive damages for negligence regarding features like infinite scroll and autoplay. Meta pays 70%, while Google covers 30%. This bellwether trial provides significant legal leverage for over 1,000 pending cases, and follows a separate $375 million penalty in New Mexico for misleading safety claims regarding children and signals a major shift. Moving to actual runways, things are grounded at airports. On March 26, 2026, acting TSA Administrator Han Nguyen McNeil warned of a dire 41-day funding lapse. The crisis stems from a congressional deadlock over DHS funding, leaving 50,000 officers unpaid. Some are selling plasma or sleeping in cars to survive, creating a perfect storm of 11% callouts and 480 resignations. Assaults on staff have jumped 500%. Wait times in Houston and New York exceed 4 hours, and with the FIFA World Cup 80 days away, security is sidelined since training new hires takes 4 to 6 months. In the Gem State, lawmakers are taking a hard line on where nature calls. House Bill 752 would criminalize transgender individuals using bathrooms or locker rooms aligning with their gender identity in public or private spaces, including retail stores. A first offense is a 1-year misdemeanor, while a second within 5 years is a 5-year felony. While Senator Ben Toes argues for bodily privacy, the ACLU says the law is flushing away human dignity. Passed by a Senate committee on March 23, it now heads to the full floor for consideration. Minnesota is taking aim at the federal government. On March 24, 2026, Attorney General Keith Ellison and Mary Moriarty sued the Justice and Homeland Security Departments over Operation Metro Surge. They claim they were physically blocked from crime scenes and stonewalled after federal agents killed Renee Good and Alex Preddy and wounded Julio Cesar Sosa Solis. The state wants ballistics and agent identities, arguing federal immunity shouldn't mean a total eclipse of transparency or an end run around 10th Amendment rights to investigate violence within state borders. Finally, Michael Flynn is finishing a legal marathon. The Justice Department settled with the former National Security Advisor for $1,200,000, resolving his 2023 lawsuit over malicious prosecution during the Russia investigation. While far from the $50 million he sought, Attorney General Pam Bondi called it correcting a historic injustice. Flynn, who was pardoned in 2020 after twice pleading guilty to lying to the FBI, said the deal offers accountability for his financial ruin. Senator Mark Warner condemned using taxpayer funds, but the agreement marks a total and unprecedented reversal for the department. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.